Well, we are in the heart of college football playoff time. We're now down to the quarterfinal rounds, and while this normally would mean that I would be talking about the matchups, I'm going to talk about the college football world in general right now. First of all, college football has irrevocably changed with the era of NIL and the transfer portal. For those of you who may not be familiar with what NIL is, it stands for name, likeness, and name, image, and likeness. Now, on the surface, it's supposed to mean that players can market themselves to get money. The reality is basically it's a pay for play. Colleges are basically paying their players to play for them, which up until a few years ago would be next to impossible. But as I have stated in podcasts and columns way back in the early 2000s, this was going to change because of the fact that there were legal challenges at the time, and eventually those legal challenges resulted in what we have today. The problem is that we have gone from one extreme to the other. We've gone to an extreme where just giving a t-shirt or a hamburger to a possible recruit would be a recruiting violation. Now you've got players making millions and millions of dollars and actually staying in college to make more money than going to the pros. Which, if it were just that, it wouldn't necessarily be so bad. But the problem is that with the transfer portal system the way it is right now, it is forcing players, or actually tempting players to jump programs almost every year. If you're not getting playing time in one program, you go somewhere else and get that at another place. And there, in some cases, have been players who played in one program one year, another program another year, a third program another year. Just because you have a choice does not mean that it's the right choice for you. There is something that my mom said a long time ago. She said, just because you've got the right to do something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And in many cases, I think the fact that these players have the right to jump to another school does not necessarily mean it's the right thing for them. And there needs to be reform in both the NIL and the transfer portal system. First of all, I think they should act with these NIL agreements, they should act like a contract, where if you sign, you are committed to that program for 4 years, the full 4 years. Not just for a scholarship, but for basically the entire 4 years, like a 4-year contract in the NFL. And if you want to leave, you have to give up the future, whatever bonuses or anything like that are negotiated, the future parts of the contract. Either the other school has to buy them out, or you forfeit that, or you may have to pay back some of what you've already been paid out. Now, how is that going to work? Well, it needs to work like the NFL has contracts. Every other major league sport has contracts. The NBA, the Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League. Because it can't just be going to the highest bidder. There has to be a way to where players are encouraged to stay at the programs they stay in. Now, I know coaches are going to leave and all of that, and I think there should be an exemption to that. But there should be where if a coach goes to another program and that program wants to bring some players over, there has to be a price paid for that by the program bringing those players in. And they should pay a certain amount of money to the school they're departing from. Now, what can legally be done to force this to go to a more sensible system? I really don't. I think, first of all, we need to start thinking seriously about a collective bargaining agreement for all of college football. Secondly, I think the time has come where we have to really seriously consider splitting off excuse me, the Power Four conferences, that being the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the ACC, off, and the others, the group of six, so to speak, form their own Division One AA, so to speak, for lack of a better term. I'm reminded of the Premiership in English soccer and the Championship in the other lower leagues. I wouldn't promote promotion and relegation because, quite frankly, our system wouldn't tolerate it. I don't think you would want to run the risk of having Alabama or LSU or Michigan or Ohio State being relegated to a group of five conference with all these massive TV contracts and all of that. The networks would never go for it. But what we can have is a system that basically keeps it to where players can only transfer freely inside the group of six or the Power Four or whatever. And if they want to transfer from a group of six to the Power Four, there has to be a price. I don't have all the answers. I wish I did. I can only suggest a few ideas. First of all, I think that if a player goes to a school, they have to commit to at least 2 years. They can't just leave. They have to commit to at least 2 years of being at that program under the same coach. If the coach leaves, then you can make an exception and all that, unless the coach and the athletic department and the player come to an agreement and they decide to allow the player to leave on their terms. That would be something that would be an exception to the rule. But if the coaches like the player, they want to keep the player there, and the player wants to leave, he has to at least play there for 2 years. Secondly, they have to treat these arrangements like a contract. You can't simply break a contract and go to another school just because you want to. If you sign a contract, you have to go by that contract. Now, if a coach leaves, you can make exceptions. If there's punishments for NCAA punishments or whatever, there are exceptions can be made to the rule. But the truth is that having these players just jump from one program to another as freely as they do is detrimental to the sport, and it's basically making the group of six in the Division II and Division III and the FCS basically a farm league, a feeder league to the group of four, the Power Four. And that's not what college football should be about. How do we fix this? Well, I don't expect Congress or the president to do anything about it because it's not politically popular. There may be some talk about it. I don't see that happening for the simple reason is the voters think there's far more important things that their politicians should be doing than worrying about college athletes making millions of dollars. So it comes down to the NCAA. Will the NCAA finally get to where, excuse me, my apologies, I'm still an amateur at this. This is my hobby, basically. But going back to the point, the NCAA has to get their power back to get this to where you have a system in place to where the players can't just jump. The coaches have a little more power to kind of grow players and all of that. It's a system, I think, that in a lot of ways, when this came about a few years ago, it went from being this very strict system where the power lie in the coaches and the universities to now the players have all the power, seemingly. It's become this system that in many ways I just don't think will last a long period of time, because why have a college system when the NFL can simply create their own minor league, sign players out of high school and create their own and run it themselves? It'd make a whole lot more sense that way. But, got a case of the afternoon yawns. My apology there. But here's the thing. If we can't fix this, if we can't find a way to fix this, then why follow college sports? It's basically minor league. That's what it is. It's basically minor leagues now. And you're having donors spend millions and millions of dollars on these programs, these athletes and such, in a time where these universities and colleges are facing financial strain for a variety of reasons. Um, and this is a situation where I think eventually there's going to be a backlash. And eventually there are going to be universities going, you know what? We don't need this anymore. Um, and I think it's coming. I honestly believe that within the next 10 years, there's going to be a major backlash. And you could see programs, universities say, hey, we don't need this. You know, I'm reminded about a century ago, the University of Chicago was a Big Ten team, was a very well-known college football program. But the university decided they did not want to sacrifice academics anymore for athletics. And they made the decision to get rid of their football team. And I think for a while there, pretty much every athletic program, I think they eventually brought some back, but not the football team. I think they have a club team, but not a full-fledged intercollegiate football team. That could happen. I could see the Ivy League doing it. I could see some prestigious universities eventually do it. It all depends on how far this goes. If there's no regulation of this, if this continues going on the path that it's going on right now, combined with the movements of universities to new conferences and all of that, and all the breakups of the traditional conferences and all of that, in my honest opinion, it's going to lead to eventually where there's only going to be two conferences that mean anything, the SEC and the Big Ten, and eventually they'll merge together to have this one huge super league, and everybody else will be small potatoes, and they'll be left out in the cold of basically feeder leagues and minor leagues and all of this. And you know, it's what we have seen, and there's a variety of reasons for this the last 25 years since the turn of the century, is that money has ruined college sports, not for the athletes, but for the universities themselves, for the conferences, for the overall college sports scene, the NCAA, and for the networks. Basically, greed has hurt this industry. ESPN loves having all these bowl games that in reality mean nothing anymore with the college football playoff. It's just content to them. The schools, in some cases, actually lose money on some of these bowl games. If you're a smaller school, in some cases, you are going to lose money on it because you don't get the big payout. And now, all of a sudden, you're running the risk of the smaller schools not being able to play the bigger schools because the bigger schools want to play programs that will give them more of an opportunity to make it. So they may play more of the Power Four schools in other conferences that will get them into the college football playoff and less likely to play a FCS school or power or a group of six school. And that's a problem. That is a big problem because those programs need those big paydays in order to survive and thrive. Now, will we see revenue sharing? Possible. I think that you could see a wide swath of revenue sharing coming up, not just within conferences, but within the entirety of the NCAA, of the divisions. Division one, whether you have a Power Four or Group of Five, so to speak, or Group of Six, so to speak, it all depends upon how far along we go with this. And I don't know where this is going to end. I really don't. This is something, if you told me 10 years ago that this would happen, I would not believe you. I would have thought you'd been crazy to think something like this would happen. But here we are in the reality that we are facing a situation where you have a very, very, very chaotic and very toxic environment to where in my honest opinion, I honestly believe that you're going to see college football eventually become a few haves and a lot of have-nots, and a lot of programs that have shown promise of maybe making it to a Power Four conference will never make it, and they may very well become to the point where they're basically no more than just going back to where they were in Division One AA. I hate seeing it that way, but that's the God's honest truth. I wish it were different. I truly do. But the reality is we are faced with a situation where in college sports today, the big three sports, which are basically college football, men's and women's college basketball, they're the ones getting pretty much all this money. Obviously, the football is getting more. Men's college basketball gets the second help, and women's college football pretty much gets whatever's left. And yeah, college baseball, college hockey, in some cases, will depend on where the programs are and all that. They'll get some money and all that. And there's certain areas where, like, Nebraska has a big volleyball program. Now, volleyball's become a big deal for women lately. I'm not so sure about the men. I don't know if they still even do men's volleyball anymore, to be honest with you. I think they still do. But what about track and field? What about field hockey? What about lacrosse? What about all these other smaller sports, wrestling, swimming, water polo, things like that? What's going to happen to them? And on a bigger question, what about non-athletic stuff at these universities? Are we just simply going to turn them into how much money is being wasted on these huge, gigantic salaries and all this money being spent on college football programs that could be used for other means? I mean, that's something that needs to be addressed. Now, a lot of these are done by boosters and all that, but let's face it, that money could be used for other purposes and such. So that's something we need to think about. Now, how do we go about this? What way can we get the NCAA to actually rein this in? What about the networks? Can they do anything? Because they want content. If they don't have enough content for the colleges, they're going to have to find it somewhere else. And it could eventually cost the NCAA even more down the road. This is a complex question that I wish I had more of an answer for you, but unfortunately I don't. I think the biggest problem we face today is the fact that we cannot fix what has already been broken. We can try to go back to it, but I don't think it'll work. We need to get the system to where it can be a system that the players can still make money, but they're not jumping here, there, and everywhere. Where the college football program, the smaller programs at least have a shot at keeping players or getting something in return for those players leaving. That is something important, because what's happening is the programs in the group of six in FCS, in Division II and Division III, they're going to lose out on this because they're not getting compensated for this when a player moves to a bigger school. It just doesn't make any sense. Something has to be done. I wish I had a more concrete answer for you, but I don't, and I wish I did. But those are my thoughts about college football right now. If you want to comment, please do so. Thank you very much, and hope you have a great rest of your day.